conference hall.
Yeah.
Okay.
Please, can you hear me? Yeah, Mike, thank you very
So
much for that presentation. You were making references to some of the biblical characters as types of Christ, Samuel and Elijah. I was wondering if there were any female biblical characters which were also types of Christ.
I didn't quite hear correctly. Could you please say that again? The connection was a little bit
if there were
fuzzy.
any female biblical characters that could be highlighted or seen as types of Christ.
Do the female maybe someone else can repeat it for me if you heard more clearly. Do the female characters follow Christ or?
Sorry, I'm going again. I hope you hear me. In your presentation, you mentioned, for instance, Samuel, Elijah as types of Christ. And I was wondering if there were other female characters which could also be referred to as types of Christ. Female biblical characters.
The women are types of Christ.
Right. So maybe that's a question to answer. We are having trouble understanding you. Keep going in and out. Could you use the chat box? Could someone type it in the chat box for us so that we could?
Yeah.
Because I don't think we're going to be able to hear it.
But I think I was hearing. Maybe I'm also asking the question to what she was asking. That are they examples of female figures who are seen as types of Christ, just like the male figures? If that's how I heard it.
Right. Yes. So women might imitate Christ, but so for example, the martyrs. But when Cyprian uses women from Scripture, the women, if as types, the women are always types of the church. So Hannah is a type of the church. Rachel is a type of the church, whereas Leah is a type of the synagogue. So Rahab is a type of the church. So the women in Cyprian's, when he uses them as types, they're always in that positive, when he uses them in that positive way as types. Women are always types of the church and men are types of Christ.
So, Reverend Robert, you're up next.
Thank you. Thank you, Edwina. This was a very interesting talk that you gave. And my question is about, through Scripture, we see, but also in history, we see that women tend to be more regulated, and they tend to have there's more rules about them. Women should not talk in church and so on. And Cyprian is talking about the same things. Why does society feel the need to tell women what to do and not as much the other parts of community?
Well, maybe that's a much broader question. But I guess one thing that comes out, so yes, Cyprian does, attempts to regulate women, particularly the dress of virgins. But besides that, and he, where he says women shouldn't speak in the church, it's just in a collection of his biblical texts. He doesn't actually address it in any of his other writing. He has a testimonia collection, which is all biblical texts joined together to make certain points about Christian life. So in that sense, the church was certainly quite structured in Cyprian's day, and he probably didn't have any women speaking in his churches. But other than that, he does try to keep the virgins in line, who seem to be a bit out of line because they seem to be quite wealthy and therefore doing their own thing. But if we leave the virgins to one side, mostly he's giving the same kind of directions to everybody. And I think he's particularly got a problem because I guess Cyprian's problem are mostly not with women. Cyprian's problems are with confessors or the presbyters who are letting people back into the church. So a lot of Cyprian's attention actually goes to trying to regulate them. So I guess it's partly his circumstances direct who he's got problems with. He also has problems with people breaking away from the church, so he devotes a lot of attention to them. So in one sense, while Cyprian has what we might call traditional or common through history values about women, what he doesn't overly emphasize that in his works because he's got other people that he's got more of a problem with. So in that sense, both men and women have to be careful of, leaving the path astray. But that's why I just made the note at the end. Sometimes in culture today, or in America, some aspects of American culture, I suppose, there's a lot of talk about how women should dress and things like that. Cyprian talks about it, but it's more from the perspective of flaunting your wealth when you should be giving it to the poor people rather than kind of being inappropriately attractive to men. So that was a very long answer to your question.
Thank you, Edwina. So we'll do Seth's question in the chat, and then after that, after Seth's question, we'll go to Rachel.
Oh,
so
okay.
Seth writes this. Thank you. Can you see that? Can you see the question?
Or yes. So I'll read it. So Cyprian's view about Eve. Interesting to know his perspective on her since she's associated with the fall, how his emphasis on purity might have shaped his interpretation of Eve's role. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, Cyprian does mention Eve as, Adam listened to his wife's voice, and he negatively refers to Job's wife, just like he used a woman at the beginning to lead, the man astray. So he tries to lead, Job's wife, because devil uses Eve. It's more about the devil getting his clutches into people, really. So he doesn't really, I don't think he's really focused on Eve with regard to purity. It's more just about being a stock character, and people can be easily deceived. Don't let yourself be deceived. It's more like the 2 Corinthians version of Paul, where he talks about Eve being deceived, and so we shouldn't get ourselves be deceived. So I don't see him using Eve so much with regard to purity as just like a classic example of being deceived or being kind of used to be led astray. But it's in the context of patience and perseverance and trusting in God. That's more the context.
Okay, thank you. So, Rachel, would you like to ask your question? Did we lose her, or did I cut her off?
Oh, thank you very much. Sorry. Yeah. I realized that over the years,
That's a big question. I'll first say something about women as a type of the church. For Cyprian, the church is something very beautiful and precious. That's God's. That's the bride of Christ. That's how we're children of God through the church. So for women to be types of the church is not a bad, a lowering thing. That is still a precious thing. So I'll just say that first about Cyprian. The second thing I would say, this is, I'm a little bit hesitant to speak for God, but this is my perspective on what I think Scripture says, I mean, Cyprian has it too, in that women are, if we look at the martyrs, if we look at the mother of the Maccabeans, women are called to be faithful followers of Christ as well. And they do that in their being a woman. Women don't have to come in to be faithful followers of Jesus. Sometimes that attitude is shown, like men is the ideal and women are kind of less than the ideal, but that's really actually not a biblical perspective. That's more like a perspective of Aristotle or some of those Greek philosophers, that women are like defective men. So I think when I look, yes, of course, there's the verses from 1 Corinthians and Timothy that get cited a lot. But when we look at the women in Scripture and what the women did, if we look at Deborah or Jael, I always laugh when people talk about biblical womanhood. I always think of Jael with the hammer putting the spike through